If you've ever thought to yourself, I'd rather just read about this than actually do it, you're not alone. The Enneagram 5 newsletter exists to help you move from knowing to experiencing. Every Saturday, you'll get insights designed to help fives grow without overwhelm. Sign up for free today at enneagram5.com/newsletter or visit the link in the description. Now on to the show. So Cody.
Yes.
What makes you happy?
Peace and quiet.
So I know you're only like half joking.
I'm not joking.
You're not joking at all?
No.
Oh. I mean, yes. I meant like truly in your soul happy.
I have no idea Isn't that what we're talking about today?
The reason why we're talking about happiness is, especially at our unhealthiest levels, as fives, we really get into cynicism and nihilism. And often that leads to hopelessness and apathy and all of that. And I think that that's sort of the antithesis of happiness. But before we have this conversation, I feel like we kind of need to define the terms a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's define this relationship, right?
Yeah.
So what is happiness?
You're asking me?
I'm asking you, yeah.
Well, the Beatles would define it as a warm gun. Happiness is defined. I can read you do you want me to get the
No, I want you to tell me what you think happiness is. What is the Cody definition of happiness?
I often wonder if I've ever actually been happy in my entire life. So I don't know. I would say that happiness and contentment go hand in hand in my mind. If I ever feel my quote unquote happiest, then I'm probably the most content in that moment that I can be, which doesn't happen very often. I struggle very much with not only just being in the moment, but also being in the moment and being happy about it. So that's something that's always kind of a part of my journey moving forward.
What does contentment mean to you?
I would say that contentment goes hand in hand with having little to no anxiety in that moment, and also just being. It's hard for me to not use the word content.
Contentment means being content.
Yeah, exactly. I can think of a few times in my life where I was fully in the moment and I was completely okay with it. And I think another part of it too is being in the right mindset where I'm just along for the ride and I'm not playing scenarios out in my mind as to how that situation is going to go. I'm not trying to manipulate the situation to go a certain way that I want it to. I'm not trying to control anything. I'm just actually just there, and I'm able to enjoy that moment and take in that moment for what it is and appreciate that moment. And usually in those times, I am a lot more thankful and feel a lot more positive towards the world and the people around me. And I I almost look at those moments in real time as an independent film, in those feel good moments in independent movies where you're like, God, this is a good story. Sometimes my mind will take me out of the moment just long enough to go, man, this is a good story. And then I'm back in it, and I think that that's really fun. And usually it's in those times. And for me, when I start thinking of those times or times that I've been content, it's actually pretty easy to make a list because it's not that many times that I've been fully content. And also a lot of them have certain things in common. So it's easier for me to go from one thing to the next thing and remember that, maybe I have had brief moments where I was at least content enough that you might say that I might have been happy a little bit.
So what are some of those moments? I'm really curious.
I didn't expect you to come back to me so fast. I was drinking wine. I remember as a kid, my dad had a boat and he loved going out on the boat, and we were always on the lake. And pretty much any time that I was on the boat, I was happy, like genuinely happy as a kid, from pretty much grew up on it. And I remember very distinctly times where I was sitting on the front of the boat and wind hitting my face, hair blowing in the wind. There was something really cathartic about sitting in the front of my dad's boat while we were riding and hitting the waves, and just that rhythm of the water and the wind hitting my face. And I always distinctly remember being pretty at peace in those moments. And then even more so cathartic, I think, whenever we'd be coming back in at night and I would be laying on a bunch of towels or something underneath. My dad would put a cover over the front of the boat, and we'd be laying on the floor. My dad would put a tarp or a cover that was made for the boat on top of the front of it, and I'd lay underneath it. And I remember just going to sleep to that hard rhythm of the water underneath us, because he would be driving slower, obviously. I remember that pretty early on as being a pretty happy moment for me. I think of times where there's a lot of times in my childhood when I felt that way. And I guess they all kind of have something in common, which is that there's usually a body of water involved. So I guess maybe water makes me feel at peace a lot and makes me feel pretty content and takes anxiety away. I spent a lot of my life not realizing that I had anxiety, and I think that played a lot into keeping me from being able to actually feel in the moment enough to be able to appreciate it, or even be able to acknowledge if I was content or not, or happy or not. And so I think that was something that I couldn't really see. And it wasn't until I was older and I realized that I have anxiety, and it's something that I have to deal with, whether through medication or through meditation, different ways of being able to recharge.
What would you say is your happiest moment?
Man, my happiest moment ever?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I have a happiest moment ever. I can think of highlights that...
Like, what's one really, really happy moment?
So my mom always says that St. George Island is our entire family's happy place. Mm-hmm. She's always said that. And I always just kind of agreed, like, okay, mom's being cheesy again. But a lot of the times that I was happiest was probably there. And I think it's because I know that as soon as I drive across the bridge and we're on the island, I don't really have to think about anything else. And for the longest time, they didn't really have internet, so I really didn't have to think about anything else. I still like to pretend there's no internet there. And one time we were all there as a family. We had some friends with us too, and we had rented scooters, and we rode those scooters into the ground the whole time we were there. We just rode them all the time. But I remember distinctly there was this one night that we were riding them, no lights there at all. And there were stars, a moon was out. It was a pretty bright moon. And we were just riding the outer road that goes around the outside of the island. So you have ocean on one side and then just sand dunes on the other. And that's pretty much it. And we were just kind of riding. And I had my earbuds in underneath the helmet, and so I was listening to the album Ghost Stories by Coldplay, and just kind of on repeat, but front to back. And it is, I'll tell you right now, it's the perfect soundtrack to be riding a scooter at night and the cool breeze hitting your face, and it feels almost surreal to be doing that. And we were just, there's nothing on the road, there's nobody there, so we're just like weaving across the streets, and just probably that's the first time in my life I ever wanted a motorcycle, because I was like, I get it, I get the appeal. That's oddly enough a time that sticks out to me. Again, though, near a body of water.
And riding something near a body of water.
That's true. Yeah. Maybe it was reminiscent of riding in a boat with my dad as a kid. Yeah, so maybe. It might have been kind of bringing it back around for me. But I mean, I can think of a few other times too, all of which are body of waters. But there was a time just a couple of years ago, or last year, we were floating down the river, as people do in this part of the country. There's a lot of big rivers in the Ocoee River and all that. And so we were floating down, drinking alcohol and just hanging out. And I remember there was just, it's funny, this is how much of an impact it had on me, but it was like maybe a short amount of time overall, maybe 30 to 45 minutes of time where we were just floating, and Madison was actually in. We have a blow up kayak, but I can't get in it because I'm too heavy. So I had her in it, and she was the one paddling, and I was on a tube behind it and just making her pull me. And I remember I was down in the water, and at this point I had a pretty nice buzz. And so, cold water, really hot day. we're just like floating down this river, and I was literally along for the ride in that moment and not thinking about anything else that was going on. And it was a time for me to fully, completely unplug, and everybody was just kind of doing their own thing as we all went down these kayaks and tubes together, but we were all kind of separate, but together. So it's kind of my dream. So that really sticks out to me. And then really any trip that I've ever taken with Madison's always usually the most refreshing and rejuvenating time, because she's the least stressful person I've ever known to be around and to do things with and to travel with. I have a really high standard for people that I want to travel with. I don't like people to have agendas and like tell me what to do and have this itinerary of this is what we're doing from beginning to end, morning till evening. These are the activities we're doing all together. Like that's my nightmare. And I don't like to do that with people. I love to go on trips with people as long as that trip means we're going to hang out when we hang out, and we'll also do our own thing when we want to do our own thing, and then that's fine. And so that's kind of the way that she is. And so it's been always a good time to be able to go and explore a new city together or do whatever. And so we went to Savannah last summer, and that entire trip was just super fun. And there was a whole underlying, I guess, a little bit of anxiety because I was afraid that I was going to cause you guys to try to have a baby by yourself.
Right. That was, right.
But and if you've listened to previous episodes, you know the story. But we had a great time, and in being during a pandemic, everything was kind of shut down. There wasn't really anybody in the city, so we kind of just had the city to ourselves, and I was able to just kind of hang out. I did blow a tire, and that ended up because I ran over a coat hanger, and so I went into the tire. But it ended up being kind of a blessing in disguise, as they say, because we were there and we didn't know where to go. And I was like, man, what should we do? And because we have to wait for this mount, we have to wait for my car to get a tire. They said it's going to be 4 hours, but I bet it's not. And so I was like, well, let's do something. And I looked and I was like, wait, we can rent scooters nearby. So we took an Uber right over to the scooter place, rented 2 scooters, hopped on them and just took off, and then rode all over Savannah on scooters. And again, super fun time. I love scooters and bodies of water apparently bring me peace, and I'm usually pretty happy with those things.
And boats.
Yeah. Water and any kind of vehicle that is associated with it.
It's so funny. I feel the same way about those things.
Really?
Yeah. You brought up a couple of things there that I wanted to touch on. Obviously, I've thought about this a lot, which is why we're having this conversation.
Right.
I think that the best way that I can describe happiness is it's a state of being, obviously, but more specifically, it's an awareness.
Yeah.
What I'm picking up on from what you're saying is there's something that's taken you out of your normal environment, and it's caused you to like sort of reset and become aware. And it's an awareness that is a connection to things. And whether it's like your connection with the earth, with the elements, there's that awareness of the connection of the energy between the two of you. And even like if you want to get a little woo-woo about it, that when you talk about riding the waves and that kind of rhythm, that, that's a vibration, that's a frequency.
Yeah.
Right? And so to me, happiness is that awareness. And the reason why I define it that way is because what I think the sort of root cause of unhappiness is for a 5.
I would say that I get a pretty high level of enjoyment from, like you were saying, connecting to 2 people, or 2 people connecting like one-on-one. Like I've always been a one-on-one person. I'm not a big groups person. I don't suddenly like integrate to my 8 self and be a performer in a group of people. That's your thing. That's not my thing. Usually when I become the center of attention in a group of people, I regress and I cocoon.
Yeah.
It's not really the same for me. So one-on-one conversations with anyone who I find interesting is always going to be those times where you lose track of time and you lose track of like what's going on around you. Then that's about as in the moment as you can be. And I've had that happen so many times. I've had it happen in smoky bars with random strangers, usually not strangers as much as it is somebody that I've found interesting enough that I've gotten to know them. So they're not really a stranger anymore, or it's somebody that I actually know and we can sit and talk. I mean, this podcast is born out of us being able to do that and love to do that in any context, literally anywhere. I think that there was a time last summer when we sat on my balcony overlooking Main Street in a particularly turbulent time in both of our lives.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I like to think that the podcast was born that night.
I think it was. I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an awareness of that connection, but also like the thing that I want to highlight there too is it's the connection that is still maintaining the separation. So you're not just like melding and meshing with someone like a 9 would. You are still maintaining your identity, but you're seeing a reflection in someone else that you find appealing and enjoyable and that sort of thing. Yeah. So before we this conversation is going to take forever.
Oh, that was too good. It sounded like
Give me some more of that while it's out.
That really got me. I was tickled my funny bone. Oh man, that really got me.
All
I
right.
really thought I could. I don't know why I thought I could do that, like stealthy.
I feel like as far as a moment of true deep happiness goes, it's not something that I'm ever like aware of in the moment or as it's happening. For me, at least, it's always something that I recognize in retrospect. It'll be, just like something happens, I'm spending time with someone or something of that sort. And then as I think back on it or just kind of like process the memories of what was just happening, I'm just like, wow, that was a great time. I was so happy as all of it was going on. But it's definitely never anything I feel like I'm aware of as it's happening. Usually, it just kind of happens when I am able to spend quality time with the people that I love and the people I care for and doing things, minimal things to entertain ourselves, but mostly just kind of like having the ability to spend good quality time with the people that I genuinely care for.
There was something else that you said that I wanted to unpack a little bit more too. You said that you don't know if you've ever really truly been happy. And up until just like a couple of years ago, I felt the same way. I actually thought that happiness was impossible for me.
It's going to be a story about your kids.
It's not. There is a story about one of my kids, of course, but no, I thought that happiness was impossible for me. And one of the questions that I wanted to answer in this, or attempt to answer, or maybe just explore a little bit in this conversation is, can fives ever truly be happy? Yeah. Because I didn't think that I could. And there were multiple reasons for that. And I want to make some distinctions here because there were periods of my life where I legitimately was clinically depressed. Yeah. And so there's absolutely a neurological, biological component of our emotions and our perceptions of the world and all of that. So setting that aside, the way that I viewed my life and myself was through a very cynical, nihilistic lens. And anytime I came across someone who was really optimistic or really happy, it was like, one of three things is going on here, right? They're faking it.
Right.
Probably because they want to sell me something. Right?
Yeah. Usually religion in some way.
Or two, they are just incredibly naive or ignorant or have just had this incredibly charmed life where nothing bad has ever happened to them ever. Or they're oblivious to reality in a way where they can just live in their own fantasy world. Or three, occasionally I would meet someone who genuinely seems to be happy, but then I would say they must just be doing it through sheer force of will. They just have this intense willpower where they can push through all of the shit in the world.
The Ted Lasso effect.
Yeah. Where they just push through, they have an abundant amount of energy, and they can do that. And so, to me, that was the only hope of ever actually being happy. And I knew that with my limited resources, I would never be able to do that. And so I really thought that I couldn't be happy.
Okay.
I was just I was wondering if you had any comments on that.
I mean, I may have like was thinking of responses to other questions when you were saying all those things. So I'm gonna have to recalibrate.
Okay.
I think that I definitely feel that in the sense that I've spent a lot of my life thinking, not really sure if anything was ever going to make me happy, or not really sure that I had the capability to feel such things deep enough that I would actually consider it happiness.
Yeah.
And that's something that's always been kind of an issue for me. You know, I always heard of, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I've always thought, how is the pursuit of happiness all it's cracked up to be? Is that really the point of our life? Because I don't know if I can get there. And if I do get there, then what? There's no, if you obtain happiness, then there's no way to retain it. So it's going to be fleeting. Happiness is always fleeting because there's always shit in the world. So it's going to be, how do you hang on to it, right? And so I think that's, and of course, I'm sure we're heading in the direction of being more of a mindset that surpasses our ego, which I think is a really big part of it. Something I was going to say earlier was, I think a lot of those times where I was able to disconnect from myself and my awareness of everything else except for what was happening right in front of me was also the time that my ego got out of the way a little bit, where I was able to see I wasn't trying to judge the situation or assess the situation or be so aware of myself in the situation. I was just there, and I was just existing. And I think that has a lot to do with it. And also is something that, as I've gotten older, it's a little bit easier with each day that passes. It's a little easier to recreate that intentionally. And I think that there's been a lot of times in my life where I allow myself to go there. It's because a lot of times it's, like I said, it's ego. It's like I'm not allowing myself to go there. It's not that I can't feel those things. I don't let myself feel those things. And I think that most of my life I spent it thinking that because I ask the hard questions and I'm thinking about the things that no one else is thinking about, or looking at it a way that no one else is looking at it, that I see the darker side of everything. And therefore I'm never going to be happy, because nothing is ever purely good or purely there to be enjoyed for just someone's happiness. How do you feel happy or content when nothing is there for that? And so, that's always been a big struggle for me.
What are you telling yourself that in those moments, what are you telling yourself that would happen if you let yourself feel it?
I think that in those times where I was feeling like I wasn't able to fully engage, I think a lot of it is just my over-analyzing of self and how others perceive that self, and not wanting to be too much of myself with anyone. I think it was always a huge part of it for me when I was younger and in past times in my life. And it wasn't until probably my 30s before I started getting to a place where I didn't give a shit anymore, and I was able to be myself. And it was just exhausting trying to put up this facade of whoever it was I was trying to be all the time. And because I didn't know. And I tried to be like the artist, the music artist that was mysterious and cool or whatever. And then there's a time where I tried to be like, just wear a mask all the time and not let anybody in. There've been different phases in my life where it was always some form of mechanism I had in place to make sure that no one actually got to know me, because if they actually got to know me, then maybe they would actually have control over me. Maybe they would be able to manipulate me. Maybe they would use those things against me. And I always want to be the one in control. I want to be the one manipulating, not the other way around.
Or, in maybe a slightly less cynical view, you find yourself actually enjoying someone, and then if you start to feel a dependence on someone, that's almost as bad as feeling controlled, because
that does feel like you're being controlled.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's just not intentional, right?
Right.
It's your perception of now there is a dependency on my part, which means that there are expectations and there are requirements of me. And I don't like that as a 5, right? I want to keep all requirements of me to a minimal. That kind of ties in with what I feel like is the main source of unhappiness for a 5, is that they say our passion is avarice, which is greed, but it's not like a materialist greed. It's a internal resources greed. And so we're hoarding these resources, and it all comes from this scarcity mindset, this story that we're telling ourselves that everything is limited, that there's not enough to go around, and especially that I don't have enough to share. And so if we see everything through this lens and then couple it with our defense mechanism or our coping mechanism of detachment, and specifically detachment from our feelings, then what we're doing is we're separating ourselves and at the same time like hoarding everything. So when you view the world in a way where there's never enough, there's no such thing as contentment, right? And going back to like your point, like contentment for you is kind of the first stage of happiness, right?
Yeah.
And there is no contentment if all you see is lack everywhere.
Yeah.
And when people talk about fives going into cynicism and nihilism, I think like that's the path of how we get down there, is we go through this step of the scarcity mindset, the lack, and that drives us into saying that everything is meaningless. It's not worth the effort because we're just trying to hoard all of our resources, right?
Right.
And the more we kind of go into that spiral, the more the more we separate, and the more it becomes meaningless, and the more that it's not worth the effort. And it just kind of, it just compounds on itself until the point where we've convinced ourselves that we're never going to feel happy because it's impossible. And to your point, the world isn't even set up in a way that's even attainable for anyone because they're faking it if they do seem happy.
All the time.
All the time. Yeah. That is the progression down. And that's where I lived literally 30 years of my life.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I did too. I mean, anytime if somebody said that they were happy, like if somebody said, man, tonight was such a good night, I was really happy this evening, I'd believe them because that's attainable. If somebody said, I've really just gotten to a place where I'm happy all the time, I would say bullshit.
I feel like as a 5, personally, I am not connected enough to my emotions to know that I am feeling truly deeply anything specifically happy. I'm a 5 with balanced wings, and so my 4 wing combining with my 5 wing and also pieces of the 6, it makes negative emotions a little bit more easy to recognize because it leads into the nihilism and the drama, like the enjoyment of heavy, dark things and things like that. So it's easier for me to almost detach via romanticization with dark, heavy, bad feelings. It's almost like I'm not feeling them because I'm experiencing them theatrically. So yes, it's authentic, but I'm able to trick my brain into thinking it's not authentic. With happiness, I think that I would mistake it for stress or anxiety, which might be the 6 wing as well, the 5 with the 6 wing portion. I think I would feel it as a physical flutter in my body, and previously my experience with that flutter is that it's anxiety, and I would think, oh, let's avoid that because that's anxiety, and my stressor 7.
Very real way, I had very limited energy.
Yeah.
And
your battery was always on empty.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had it wasn't even that my battery was on empty. It was that my battery was like the size of a watch battery, trying to power like a 747. Like,
right. It didn't matter how charged you get. It only lasted so long.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And so I had to be, super conservative with that. And I remember when we were in Bellingham, when we lived out there, and I went down the path of focusing on my health and becoming more healthy physically.
Yeah.
And I started to have more energy physically. And I would assume also with losing the weight that I did and actually getting some exercise and getting better sleep, that my body was also producing the right amount of chemicals and things like that to help with that. So I was kind of like getting to almost like a base level of what physically I probably needed to be. But I remember that I started to get little tiny glimpses, like every once in a while, I would start to feel like that sense of that awareness. And I'm like, that's new. Yeah, I don't really remember it because I actually don't remember a lot about my childhood. I know I had some happy moments, but like looking back on it, it was very much I never thought of myself as a happy kid. And especially in my teenage years, man, I was like super emo and like.
Yeah, I don't know if I definitely wasn't emo, but I was anxious.
Yeah,
I wasn't happy either, but in the opposite direction.
Right. I have a 4-wing, so I was very, very emo, like just angsty. And I think what started to change for me was after I left my job a few years ago and started to go down that path of self-growth, the practices that we talked about in the self-care conversation and in other episodes, but specifically in this context, doing things like mindfulness meditation, what I was learning there was just becoming more aware and becoming aware of the thoughts that were coming in and not judging them. But I found myself, the more I practiced that, the more I was able to just dismiss any thought that was not serving me. And I remember I hit this point where I started to just kind of feel like a baseline happiness.
Huh.
And I wasn't giving it any effort.
Right.
I wasn't trying, like it sort of happened without me even realizing it.
Yeah.
I'm like, where did that come from? What's going on here? And I started to realize that it had become such a habit for me consciously that it started to seep into my subconscious of that practice of when stuff comes in, just dismissing it. And what I realized from that was that it wasn't that I was just fundamentally unhappy. It's just that I was letting those voices, those cynical voices, dictate what I focused on.
Yeah.
And that was when I had this big aha moment of, there's this phrase that my mentor taught me that is, you are where your attention is. And that stuck with me because what I realized was that I was choosing to focus on the negative. And I thought that being a cynic meant that I was more objective, right? Because going to your point earlier, like I was seeing the world in a way that no one else was seeing it. And and the only reasonable conclusion from that is that we're all fucked and that it's not worth it. And no, I shouldn't say that.
What is it? I can edit it out. Now I need to know what it was.
Really, the only question that anyone should ask themselves is whether or not they should kill themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, like that literally was that's where I was most of the time. But what I realized was that it was because I was bent in that direction. And that when I started to become more aware, I started to see the positive things about the world. I realized that it's not like you say, okay, here's all of the darkness and I'm just going to ignore it, right? Is that you can hold them, like each one in each hand, the darkness and the light, and just walk forward with them.
Yeah.
You can sort of hold them each in both hands and appreciate them for what they are and choose where to put your attention. When I look back on my life, the periods of the most growth, where I learned the most and came out of it my best self, were those periods of intense darkness. Where like the darkness was my teacher.
Yeah. And
you can't really get to happiness if you're ignoring the darkness. But the difference is the darkness is not your reality. That's just one part. Like the darkness and the light, they go together and you can't have one without the other. And so the way that I started to shift the way I was thinking about it was, it's just a matter of where I can train myself to place my attention, but I leave space for both.
Yeah, I agree with that.
The other piece of it too, and I think that this gets overlooked a lot in these discussions, kind of going back to the idea that cynicism is more objective. I'm hesitant now to like bring up stories about my kids because you called me out on it, but I think about right now, our youngest is 10 months, almost 11 months.
Uh-huh.
And unless he is hungry or has a dirty diaper or is really tired, you look in his eyes and you see pure joy.
Yeah. And
it's not until later in life where that changes. And so to me, happiness is a default setting. I feel like because all my youngest knows is this present moment. And that's all that he's aware of.
Yeah, there is no past.
Yeah, and it is an abundant world out there. So the other piece of it that also helped me kind of climb out of this was, and we talked about this in self-care, but I think we didn't really connect the dots for this piece of it, is that when we do things like gratitude exercises where we write things we're grateful for, I've been thinking about that a lot. Like, why is that particularly effective for me?
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that it's because you can't have a scarcity mindset if you're grateful for something. You know what I mean?
No,
like,
explain.
So if I'm always focusing on the lack,
Yeah.
I'm never going to be grateful for what I have. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And so if you flip that and you start to train yourself to look for things to be grateful for and to genuinely feel grateful for them, then your attention shifts off of the lack and onto the abundance of the thing that you have. You're grateful for it, you're no longer focused on the lack. And the more that you do that and you make a habit of it, the more that you can then not only shift your attention away from the thoughts that don't serve you, but shift your attention towards the things that raise that awareness and into that state of being that we recognize as happiness. The other piece of it too, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, where part of holding the darkness and the light in the same place is that, and the same place, and learning to be grateful is that you can also learn to be grateful for the darkness. And then it's something that is no longer a source of pain or trauma. It's a source of empowerment. It's something that can fuel you in a positive way and a source of growth. And so I think that's why I keep coming back to the gratitude thing, is that it really is the elixir to that wound of scarcity and rejection and all the things that are challenges as a 5. And is a really great tool to break ourselves out of that. But it requires that awareness.
Yeah, for sure. I think part of being able to appreciate a story is being able to find beauty in the darkness and finding, in a weird way, finding and appreciating the darkest moments of someone's story or your own story too. Obviously, it's I would venture to say it's almost impossible to appreciate the darkest moments of your story while you're in them, but at least being able to look back at them and not harbor ill feelings or resentment towards those things in your life and those things that happened to you, and being able to let those things go is a part of growing forward and carrying it with you.
Yeah. So counterpoint.
Yeah.
Because what you brought that up is a really good point. Because earlier you said that even if you felt happy, you didn't believe it's something that could be sustained.
Yeah.
And the wisest people I know are able to maintain that joy in the darkest times as well. And how they go about that is, so I think I've mentioned before, there are a few Pixar films that really get to me.
Yep.
And one of them is Inside Out. Have you seen that?
Nope.
Okay. Oh, I don't want to ruin it for you. The kind of moral of the story is that, we often avoid pain and sorrow because it's so uncomfortable for us. And we focus on the joy when we're young. And then we have this transition period where we become aware of the sorrow and the pain and the sadness. And it can consume us. But the more we try to avoid it, the more that it sort of takes over. And instead of pushing it away, we then learn that we can embrace it and the joy at the same time and find joy in the sadness. And the people that I know who I really look up to, they can do that. And that's sort of what I aspire to, is in those dark places. It's not that you're like, all right, well, my dog got ran over today. Yippee. Like it's
right. Yeah.
It's that you allow yourself to feel it and at the same time have a gratitude for the moment. You know what I mean? Like you can feel the sorrow and at the same time be grateful that, you had that person or that pet in your life, and that you could sort of make space for both of them, like we talked about. When we talk about being happy or joyful or content, like that's really what it is. It's not about a state of euphoria all the time. It's really more about that perspective and that awareness.
Yeah, I think about like when somebody dies and everybody sits around and talks about all the good things about that person, or the good memories that they have and that they shared with them, and kind of it's almost like almost a sacred thing to talk about those things in that moment and keep those moments alive for those people to kind of relive both in that moment and moving forward. But that's also a way of appreciating somebody and appreciating the moment for what it is and kind of the gravity of that moment, even though it can be incredibly sad and incredibly painful. Being able to stop and appreciate the good things about that situation and kind of what led you to that point, which is all the memories and the things that you carry with that person. I mean, that's what comes to mind when you say that. I assume that's kind of like a nice visual way of thinking about it.
I would say moments where I feel happy are when I feel safe. As a 5, I am in a constant state of tension and to some degree fear, and that's just how I am, and I've kind of always been like that. I would say when I am truly happy is those moments where I'm relaxed, even around people I like, and I feel safe and I feel grounded and I feel attached to my body, because I'm usually not attached to my body. I'm usually just all up in my head having all of these thoughts or all these nervous thoughts, and one moment where I feel happy would be just moments when I can just go, phew, there's just no stress. I feel okay. I feel like I'm not going to be drained. No one's going to take anything from me. I feel grounded. I don't feel like I have to have all of these thoughts or I need to go and run away. And it's actually pretty funny because I'm always to some degree scanning places I can get away. You'll usually see me in the back of a room or as distant as possible from a crowd. So basically it would be safety and it would be being relaxed.
Once again, I hesitate to share this since you don't want to hear anything about my kids.
I didn't say that. I just know how you parents are, and you're always like, I wasn't happy until I had children.
That's not true, but they can bring like a whole new awareness. Like that's the thing.
I mean, your kids bring me an awareness and perspective that I didn't have. So I'd assume if I had my own, it would be way stronger. Because you were talking about your youngest having such an intense joy. And I think if your middle child is the one that I think embodies positive energy and exuberant joy all the time.
That kid is amazing.
He explodes with joy when he runs into a room. It's so funny.
And he's definitely takes after my wife, our oldest.
Carries the dark demons of his father.
So much a 5. Like it's so weird that he just turned 5 years old. It's so weird that he is already demonstrating.
That's usually when the 5 characteristics manifest themselves, is when they turn 5.
It's like his nervous system's on overdrive. He very much like a lack mentality. Like he's always hoarding his things, and he's hoarding our attention as much as possible, and very, very focused on how the middle child came too soon, or actually came at all, because he said he didn't want a brother, and still says that to this day. And he'll say things like, I wish he wasn't born. I'm okay with the other one, but I just want it to be like me and you and like me and mommy and daddy.
Oh yeah, it's weird that he's okay with the youngest, just because it's so far away from him. I guess.
Well, he was in a different phase of life because when he was born, for the first 2 years of his life, it was all about him. He was our center of attention, and so he looks at our middle child as the one who stole that from him.
Yeah.
And so there's definitely resentment and animosity there. But he's just very much in his head all the time. And I will say, I think that was a good sign to me, is that when I was younger, I had a lot of intense stuff, like intense emotions and things, but I withdrew inside and I compartmentalized all that as much as possible, and I didn't let that out. He has these very intense outbursts, like really quickly sometimes. And to me, that's a really good sign that he feels safe enough that he doesn't have to withdraw. And I can see when there are certain moments where I didn't handle a situation the way that I probably should have, and he will withdraw, and it's just like he climbs under his bed and just like if you go anywhere near him, he just like screams.
Yeah.
And because he's trying to figure out, like trying to deal with and the intense emotions and understand them and let himself feel them and stuff. And so, but I think that it's a really good sign to me that we're at least doing something right, that he feels safe enough to express them, even if they are most of the time very, very challenging to handle.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful that he can do that, because it wasn't the same for me. And, you know, my parents did the best they could, but at the same time, like they didn't have the tools and they didn't know anything about like the Enneagram, for instance, or just, you know, parenting today is a whole different thing than it was, you know, 30 years ago.
Yeah, they didn't have the internet, you know? Everybody's connected now.
And so I am grateful for that. But so
well, and I will say this, that just, you know, there's hope on the horizon, because I feel like I was exactly the same way about my brother as your oldest is about his brother. And I think that I was the same way. I used to, when I was a kid, I used to tell my mom and dad, like, it's time to put him up now. I wanted my own time before we went to bed.
Yeah, which we started doing recently, and I think that that's helping a lot.
Yeah, no, for sure, it definitely helps. But and I mean, there's probably rough years ahead. Me and my brother were 3 years apart, and it was rough times in our adolescent and pre-pubescent years, and then into our teenage years. It was just a rough time until we got older. And
we were hoping that the third one is going to bring some equilibrium to where it's not just such a binary, like two against the other. Because that's how it was for me and my brothers. You know, I was the oldest of, well, there are 5 of us, and I have an older sister and a younger sister, but there are 3 brothers in the middle, and I was the oldest brother. And I didn't want anything to do with, well, any of my siblings really, except for my older sister, because she was older, of course.
Right. Yeah.
But she wanted nothing to do with me, of course.
Yeah.
I, like, my 2 younger brothers ended up becoming really close because I rejected them and like didn't want anything to do with them, and so they ended up bonding instead of with me.
Yeah.
So I think that I think maybe some of that might happen. I love my siblings now, and like I find that like
there's hope on the horizon, because I feel like I'm closer with my brother now than I've ever been, and I love him more than just about anybody in my life. So
yeah,
he's definitely top of the list. So I think there's hope, and they could bond in the end.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. Anyway,
I'm trying to not have any expectations, you know, like I think that's the key, is
one day at a time.
Let it be what it is, you know, and try not to force it, because that just makes it worse.
So what is your moment?
Yeah, my happiest moment. By the way, there's also some self-hypnosis techniques that you can do to accelerate that unconscious ability to focus on different things. I realized this is my happiest moment because I was going through that exercise, and part of it was just thinking about a moment that was closest to like pure joy that you can think of. And the first thing that, because I was in that state already, like it just came to mind really quickly. I didn't have to think about it. And it was not very long ago. I was in the backyard with my oldest. And so he was 4 years old at the time, and we had just bought a Frisbee. And so I was teaching him how to throw and catch the Frisbee. And at first we were out there with the whole family, and then they kind of went inside, and it just ended up being just me and him. And which he absolutely loves. Like there've been a few key times where, like, one time we built a fire in the backyard and everybody else went inside. He ended up sitting down with me, and then of course like asking stuff like, you know, what are humans, and like what
wow,
how does the moon work, and you know, like what is the universe, and just like all these like really big questions. And this
is your dream.
Yeah, I know. I'm like,
and you're like, I know the answers.
No. I love that he's asking the questions.
Yeah.
But he'll still bring that up. Like when I put the kids to bed, and I'll lay down with each of them and just have some one-on-one time, and he still will bring that up. Like, remember the time that we sat out by the fire and like talked about this stuff. And so that's really important to him. Mm-hmm. And so I knew that was one of those moments. I knew kind of in that moment, like, this is something that's really important to him. So I'm going to stay here with him and keep doing this until he's satisfied, doesn't want to do it anymore. So we were throwing it back and forth, and he picked up throwing it really quickly. Like he's actually very good at throwing things, for better or worse. But he was throwing it really well, but he was having such a hard time catching it. And so we were out there for 45 minutes to an hour by ourselves, just throwing it back and forth and trying to get him to catch it. And it was one of those things where like he kept getting so close, and it just like, it would just get so close and he just didn't have it. And then I remember I threw it and he caught it for the first time. And without thinking about it, we both just like reacted, and I saw the look on his face of just pure joy, and I ran up to him and I picked him up and hugged him and was like yelling. I was so excited, like all of this just in the moment without even thinking about it.
Yeah.
And it was such a simple moment, but it was to me pure joy. And it was because I was there, I was with him. It wasn't about me, it was about him, and it was about our relationship, and it was about that connection. And there was that awareness of being in the moment and helping him, like teaching him something, right? Helping him learn and helping him grow, and seeing how important it is to him, and being able to be at a place where I was able to give him that time. So there was that also that component of being grateful for that. And so it was just all mixed in, and it wasn't something that was forced. Like it wasn't something that I was trying to make happen. It just happened.
Yeah. Organic.
Yeah. But it happened because I allowed it to happen. You know?
Yeah.
And that was the moment that came to mind. And like, when I think about what it means to me, if I picture it in my head, like what that feeling is more accurately, if I recall that and try to feel it in my body, like that's the moment that I come back to connect with what it really means for me to feel truly happy.
I love that. Don't get a lot of those moments anymore in my life. Not yet. Not right now anyway.
You do have a new puppy.
I do have a new puppy. Yeah. And my dog, Sam, definitely embodies a lot of characteristics of your oldest. He also hoards his toys and won't share them with his new younger brother. Now, I'm hoping to have some of those experiences this week, actually. I'm going to visit my brother in Colorado, so maybe and my dad will be there, and it's Father's Day.
Oh, awesome.
So, I'm hoping to have some of those same moments myself, and maybe this conversation will help me get there a little bit better.
Love it.
Yeah. Well, I think the wine's gone. Yeah. That means it's the end of the conversation.
All right. That's a wrap.
All right.
Hey, it's Josiah, and I wanted to say thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode and you're the type of person who likes helping others, would you do us a favor and share it with other people like you? If you found value in this conversation, they will too. I also want to give a special thanks to our community members who shared their voice with us in this episode. If anything in this conversation has resonated with you, or if you have any further thoughts or questions, I want to invite you to join our community of other people like you and continue the conversation at Enneagram5.com.